Hello ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by sharedserviceslink.com and sponsored by TIBCO Nimbus. So we're looking today at how to standardize your shared services processes and keep the peace within your organization. And in particular, we'll be looking at your must-follow 6-step program, which will help you do that. So the lineup for today is myself. My name is Susie Weston. I'm the founder and CEO at sharedserviceslink.com, and I'm very pleased that joining me on the speaker panel today is Nigel Kilpatrick, who's the Chief Sales Officer at TIBCO Nimbus. You do have a very important role to play, so make sure that you do play it, please, which is to bring your questions to the table. I'm sure there was something that compelled you to register for this webinar today, so make sure that you do get the answers that you're seeking. Just drop your question in the free text box highlighted by the red box in front of you and submit that to me, and we will take the questions in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. So let's have a look at what we're going to be focusing on today. The main thrust of content that we're working through today and sharing with you today really comes from a program that TIBCO Nimbus and sharedserviceslink.com worked on together. It was a survey of the market that started in December of last year, where we surveyed around 104 shared services individuals on various subjects, but the main theme that was underpinning all of those questions was really around customer satisfaction within the world of shared services. So what we're going to be doing today is just walking you through some of the key findings and seeing really how that relates to the importance of standardization and how to standardize and how to actually keep the peace and keep your customer happy. And also, of course, leading to the must-follow 6-step program, which will help you get there. So, as I mentioned, the sample size of the survey that we ran was 104 companies, and all of them were shared services organizations, or a small group were in the evaluation process, the evaluation stage of shared services. And as far as the industry type of companies that responded to the survey, you can see that there was a real blend of industry, so no real surprises here. I suppose the only real thing to note, or a couple of things to note, is of course shared services is very much a cross-industry model that's applied right across any industry. It really doesn't matter what industry you're in. And but what we do have here is, if you look to the top right-hand side of the pie, is the financial services piece at 13%, and I think everyone will be in agreement that that probably would have been a little bit lower as a percentage before 2008. We're seeing a higher reduction of shared services in banking and financial services generally. So the people that actually responded to the survey, you can see here that 89% of respondents identified themselves as shared services professionals, and then we had a few people from IT, and interestingly we had a few actual shared services customers responding to the survey. So if we again just dig into some contextual data that tells us a little bit more about the people that responded. From the slide that you've got in front of you now, we can see quite clearly that accounts payable again and again is the outright winner within shared services, and no real surprises here. You'll probably be very familiar with the concept that shared services was actually set up as an enabler to improve the accounts payable function. So the two things go hand in glove, and you rarely get a shared services organisation that doesn't have accounts payable within it. It's also a function that lends itself so nicely to shared services, to centralisation, and obviously to standardize, the process standardization. You can see, if we just move down the stacks a little bit, to where the 53% and the 45% are, with HR, 45% at HR and 41% at procurement. What we're seeing at sharedserviceslink.com, because we do a number of surveys here is that as far as the adoption of HR and procurement is concerned, we are really seeing and have really seen over the past 5 or so years that the adoption of shared services for HR procurement has really been in the 40s, low 40s, mid 40s. So it will be quite an exciting time when we start breaking out into the 50s and when a single function shared services organisation becomes a multi-tower operation, or indeed a proper business services, a global business service operation. As far as the maturity of shared services is concerned, I think what we probably learned from this particular project was that the respondents were largely quite young, and a third of respondents had a shared services organisation that was 5 years old or more. And I think what you probably need to take from this slide is that in the first kind of 2-3 years of shared services, you're really setting things up, you're finding your feet, you're trying to stabilize your processes, you're probably being a bit of an irritant within the organization, you're probably upsetting quite a few people, you probably don't have the most glowing of reputation, and you're driving through huge organizational change. So it's a very, very disruptive and quite traumatic time for you probably, and for the shared services team and for organizations. So it's really within that time where customer satisfaction could potentially be at its lowest. So bear that in mind when looking at the data moving forward, but it doesn't always have to be like that. Shared services organisations can go into set up and ramp up in years 2, 3, 4 without being traumatic, without upsetting the customer, and obviously there are best practices around that too. So looking at the size of the shared services that we surveyed, what you can tell from this particular piece of data is that the shared services organisations that responded are sizable. Only 18% had less than 50 within their shared services centre, and then 50 to 500 at 50%, and obviously increasing as we move around the pie. But what we're talking about now is shared services organisations really being quite heavyweight organisations, and a lot of FTEs within a company now reporting into shared services centres. So just before I hand over to Nigel, I'd just like to ask the first poll. We've got, I think it's 3 or so polls for today. So coming up on your screen now will be the first poll, and it's really around who is the customer as far as you're concerned. So that's coming up on the screen now. So in your opinion, and you can tick a number of boxes here, you don't just have to tick the one. Is it the bill payer? Is it the head of the business unit? The business user themselves? Is it everyone that has contact with the shared services organisation? So that would be not just your internal customer, your company, but also maybe your suppliers as well. Or perhaps you don't see the business as a customer and you don't have that kind of customer-centric mentality within your shared services organisation. So please feel free to tick as many of the boxes as possible. One reason why we're asking this question is definition is always very, very interesting in shared services, because people have very different views of certain terminology within shared services. And as an event that we had in London last week for leaders in shared services, which Tibco Nimbus was sponsoring, we had a huge debate over who the actual customer was. So that really did trigger this poll here. So let's start to close this poll down. We're bang on 70%. If you haven't already responded, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. We're at 71% there. So coming up on your screen, you should see the results. Okay, so this I think is really exciting data. We've got 77% of you seeing everyone that has contact with the SSO as a customer. So that's the user, the bill payer, and potentially the supplier as well. Interestingly, at the lower end of the kind of grading, if you will, 8% fortunately don't see the business as a customer. That's a very small number, so that's fortunate for that reason. And 13% actually see it as the bill payer. So that's interesting feedback there. With that, I'd now like to hand over to Nigel Kilpatrick. Over to you, please, Nigel.
Thanks, Susie. And I think that poll is very telling. And I think that 70% of the audience seeing that everyone is the customer within the shared service organization actually, to me, is what the whole growth of the whole market is all about. Because I think the shared services market is at such an inflection point at the moment. I mean, it was great that last week I had the pleasure of being in Singapore and Hong Kong, and to listen to our customers continue to believe in the immense value of shared services and what they can bring is massively exciting. And I think we yet to really see the value that all of us that execute in this market every single day, we're really yet to see the real change that we can affect on everyone that we serve. And one of the other things that continues to amaze me at the same time is how many consulting companies, how many research companies keep on going on and on about the future of shared services, being the growth in the future is all about global business services. In some cases, yes, that is true, but it's just a symptom of further consolidation. And I think the real inflection point is not some distant future, but it's actually now. And it's what actually makes this survey so compelling. So first of all, I really want to thank Susie and her team for doing such a great job in putting all this together. And also I'd like to thank all those people who participated. And if some of you are on this call, then thank you, because it's such invaluable data. But moreover, it has answered questions that have been bothering me for years in shared services. And I really appreciate that you're enabling me to give you my view on what this survey means. And at the end, I will try and give you a 6-step program that will either give you a completely different view of the data, or even better, a platform where you can have debate within your organization, or even better than that, where you can contact us and discuss right away how perhaps Nimbus can help you affect and accelerate your change in customer satisfaction and to sustain new heights that you've never probably knew were possible. So I'm Nigel Patrick. It's wonderful to meet you, albeit virtually. And I am Chief Sales Officer for Tibco Nimbus, which really means that I and my teams have the ability to spend every single day, all over the world, working closely with global organizations, trying to revolutionize the shared service organization. And when I took over running the sales, marketing, and consulting part of our operation, just over about a year ago, one of the very first things that I did was to commit our entire strategy to shared services market. By committing every single marketing and sales dollar to you. At the beginning, some people, in fact, a lot of people thought I was crazy. But when we look at this and the opportunity that we have together, because the answer is so simple. What you do every single day is run the heartbeat of your organization. And what Nimbus does, we help you keep the heart healthy, keep you fit as you try to run longer and faster at the same time. So why don't we start looking at some of the data? So we were asking people to look ahead the next 2 years and rank their goals in order of priority. And right away, we have a very interesting dynamic about how the respondents view customer satisfaction. And I'm not sure how many of you, I'm sure most of you on this call probably have seen that sketch by Little Britain, where they have this person who plays a receptionist called Carol, whose whole customer service is purely based on what her computer says. And without fail, the computer always says no. And this kind of reminds me of that. Because if you haven't seen it, go to YouTube. But this is purely just my view, but isn't it very interesting to see that 43% see that improving customer satisfaction as their highest priority, and yet 49% of respondents believe that improving talent is the lowest priority. To me, this is staggering. It reminds me when I used to have many conversations with customers about looking at customer journeys and begin to get really excited the fact we're going to talk about or have a huge debate about attrition and waterfalls, only to be amazed actually when we peeled away the layers of the onion. I discovered that actually all they were really concerned about was the customer transaction flows, those points of system interaction. So it's a customer transaction journey, not a customer experience journey. So the really important part of the experience or happiness didn't really dawn on them or seem to be a real concern. And to me, this is what this data is telling me. And therefore, I'm still wondering, by looking at this delta between the two, the transaction and the satisfaction that is done by people, whether we're still being dominated by the ERP/IT influence when we talk about customer experience. And this is the point that I see about being an inflection point. This slide is very encouraging. As you see, 86% ranked further standardizing process as one of their top 3 priorities. Because we truly believe, as without a single operating model right across your shared service environment, that single version of the truth, it is absolutely impossible to deliver a consistent level of customer satisfaction. Also, the drop-off from the highest to the high and then below is almost double, which indicates a strong desire to get a handle on this age-old problem. My concern still, however, is that it is still looking at the transactional level, or is it looking at the whole end-to-end process standard that's being considered? Let me share a customer, at this point I want to share with you a customer case study that I think is relevant to this. We had the pleasure of dealing with Carphone Warehouse, the biggest global independent mobile retailer. And when they started their journey improving customer service in all of their 1,000 retail stores and using their shared service and the back operations to help them, they had absolutely no standard way of engaging with their customers. In fact, I tell them a lie, they had hundreds and hundreds of ways to engage with their customers, to the point where the shared service centers were taking about 1.2 million phone calls a year just from the retail operations, asking questions, simple questions about how they would disconnect from one network to another or whatever it may be. Those questions were very common, but the answers were being very, very different. And becoming into the Fortune 100 company, you have to start to think differently. So they needed to react and do it quickly. So what they did using Nimbus, they implemented a standard right across their retail enterprise that was managed by the shared service operations. That standard didn't actually have to be very good. It just had to be one standard. And right away, they believed they saw a 15% improvement in efficiency just by having one standard that wasn't so good, which they could build on, of course, in the future. But they reduced their shared service burden down from 1.2 million phone calls down to 200,000 within about 6 months. And because they were able to release their store agents to have a much better time and interaction with the customer, their public customers, their NPS, their Net Promoter Score rankings went up by 50%. And at the same time, their internal employee satisfaction has also risen by 50%. So giving all of your employees a common standard is the backbone of customer satisfaction. This is also very interesting. So only 2%, so improving governance was their top priority. And at this, the data I'm responding to when it comes to seeing process standardization as automated versus manual and automated. Only 2% responding to seeing governance of managing process change as the highest priority. I'm still left wondering, therefore, about the ability to have continuous improvement. Governance is central to ongoing customer satisfaction, unless you have strong governance of not only the process, but the changes that are inevitable in the future. This was quite a compelling statistic we got from the survey. 80% ranking improving customer service as one of the top 3 priorities. This is really encouraging to see. We have discussed this earlier in terms of how it relates to the future slides, but out of all the discussions we're having around the world, this is the single common theme. But this is what I need to do as a priority versus how do I do it. And we always see the how as the biggest challenge. So we're seeing a huge challenge mixed in with a top priority. And I don't see this priority ever going away. I'll see this still become as the most important value KPI for every shared service center going forward. Not just those who seek to be world-class either. This will just be a common theme going forward. This was also extremely interesting. Having 3%, only 3% ranking their customer satisfaction levels as excellent. It's actually not quite surprising when you look at it, at the level of maturity of the shared service organization. But it certainly is not sustainable. But the other good news is at least 63% of the customer satisfaction is good. But again, I want to pose the question on whether the SLA is being measured here from a transactional viewpoint or whether it's the OLA that's being measured. And I refer to the OLA as the happiness factor. And the next, this is also very encouraging, having 81%. To know that if we'd run this survey 2 or 3 years ago, would it be cost would be likely to be at the top of the list, and probably efficiency a close second? Continuous improvement, however, is quite a broad subject. And when it comes to customer satisfaction, it needs careful consideration, as it really needs the customer to be at the center of the improvement. They are the only ones that can really tell you what to improve. If you don't embody this ethos, you'll be left with looking at your SLA management as your foundation of improvement, and that is not sustainable. But what is also interesting to note is that in second and third place are onboarding of new customers and launch of new services. These are both people-centric. So this survey suggests a change in the market, a change in the mindset, away from efficiency to actually interaction engagement. And thinking about your business in the year ahead, in which these following is most likely to undermine customer satisfaction. To me, having complexity and lack of standardization of processes in your business, these are the two resident evils that undermine customer service and satisfaction. Complexity of having too many processes and variance that mostly unnecessary is the customer happiness kiss of death, let alone staff not being able to find process documentation in the vast depths of your intranets. And when they do find the information, do they actually trust the information they have found? I see time and time again just solving these two single issues about complexity and standardization can have a profound effect on the rest of the issues listed here. In fact, just solve these two and the rest will solve themselves. Don't try and solve the rest because you'll only solve them in silos. So take out complexity and introduce standards. So what metrics and KPIs do you collect regarding customer satisfaction? Again, if we recall my earlier points regarding what customer satisfaction is being measured on, this kind of tells me, is it about the transaction that the shared service staff are performing, or is it about the interaction, the overall happiness? This graph is clearly telling us something by looking at speed, completion, and the cost of transaction are all extremely high, that it's clear that happiness of the engagement isn't important yet. It may be interesting, but it's not important. And yes, customer surveys seem to be the most popular way to measure, but I'd be intrigued to understand what questions are being asked and how often. Are we asking questions about how well we perform from an emotional engagement, a proactive engagement, or are we purely just caring about the transaction? So at this point, I hand back to Susie for another poll.
Thank you very much. So let's just focus for a while on the word frequency and the frequency with which you actually collect customer satisfaction feedback. So coming up on your screen now, how frequently do you collect customer satisfaction feedback? Is it immediately after the event? When the customer chooses? And you've got a number of options here, so do tick all that apply. Is it weekly or monthly, quarterly or annually, or perhaps you do not collect feedback at all? We've had 58% of you respond, so if you haven't already done so, please do so. And as I mentioned, it's multiple options here, so you don't just have to tick one box. Immediately after the event, when the customer chooses, weekly or monthly, quarterly or annually, or perhaps you don't collect feedback at all. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, 73% of you responded, so thank you. Coming up on your screen now, let's have a look. So out and out winner there at 56%. The frequency of collecting feedback comes in at quarterly or annually. And the loser there is at 12% when the customer chooses. Interesting results. Back to you, please, Nigel.
Yeah, thank you for doing the poll, and that does show some very interesting data. And I think clearly, we all have some room for improvement around this. Particularly if we look at the real-time view data responses about your customer satisfaction KPIs. And I must say that I'm not surprised by this result. That almost 60% not having a real-time view of their customer satisfaction KPIs. And I really believe, my view is that this is not through a lack of desire or even need, but maybe it's due to lack of application of technology that's able to easily measure both the SLA and the OLA together. That happiness factor. I've seen many cases where KPIs are set and delivered back to the business, back to you, just because they've always been done that way. And what we need to do is rapidly change what is measured and how we can actually use that data to improve this. And this has got to come from business, not from IT. And I think the last slide here, this is great to see. We're getting close to the end of the first part of this, and it's great to see that we're beginning to see people-centric issues that are seen as highly valuable, having not only feedback as most valuable, but also better training communication of change to customers is also high. So to that end, this survey ends on a very high note. It ends on a people-centric note, and at that point, I want to hand back to Susie.
Thank you very much, Nigel. So what we thought we would do as part of the survey exercise was to try and determine the key characteristics that were shared amongst those that had excellent or good customer satisfaction and those that had either fair or poor customer satisfaction amongst their customers. And that's really what we're looking to share with you over the next chapter. So just if you focus on the bar on the left-hand side where it's got a circle and number 1, you can see here that 57% of the respondents who currently experienced poor or fair customer satisfaction levels were actually focusing on improving customer satisfaction. And so those and you can be encouraged by that, so those that had either poor or fair, they were aware of it and they were doing what they needed to within their shared services organisation to remedy that. But if you just draw your attention to the circle on the right-hand side, those that actually were already providing good customer satisfaction, and this is marked by the green box, the green stack, they were much freer in their focus and able to focus much more on continuous improvement. So not really firefighting and trying to make sure that the customer was changing from dissatisfied to satisfied and focusing on changing that status, but really focusing on the stuff that needed to happen in order to realize continuous improvement within their shared services organization. The word undermining it comes up quite a lot in shared services, and a shared services director will probably experience being undermined at some stage in the life cycle, unfortunately, and it's a horrible experience to go through, but it's something that most shared services directors can tell you stories about. So we thought we would have a look at what is it that's most likely to undermine customer satisfaction in this regard, rather than undermine the actual intentions of the shared services director. So thinking again about your business in the year ahead, which of the following is most likely to undermine customer satisfaction? If you look at the blue stack that represents the ones with poor or fair satisfaction, green stack represents those with good or excellent. Again, just drawing on the point that Nigel made earlier about those two resident evils within an organisation that can really affect not only your delivery, your cost effectiveness, the service that you're offering, but the customer experience as well. And that's around there being too many processes, so having complexity within your process environment, having lots of process variance and making it hard for both staff and clients to understand what the process rules are and how to follow the process correctly. And that takes me on to the next area, which is around compliance, standardization of processes, and difficulty within the business for customers to actually comply with the process rules. So I think you can see that there's a difference specifically on the complexity. So having lots of processes makes it very hard for customers to be satisfied with the shared services service. At the bottom performers, the top 5 most likely factors to undermine customer satisfaction are ranked here. We've got process variance, process compliance, staff turnover, and that really is attached to talent, staff competence. And you can see here that the talent plays such a key role in customer satisfaction. Customers having to adjust to processes coming at 43% and changes to systems. And a lot of this you'll find comes down to communications and educating the business users on what is involved in change, i.e. change to systems. So that's training, educational material and education experiences for the customer. So let's have a look at the difference between the top and bottom performers as far as having real-time customer satisfaction KPIs are concerned. So those that have real-time view of their customer satisfaction KPIs, 68% of those with poor customer satisfaction did not have real-time views of their customer satisfaction KPIs. So 68% here in the red and in the green, those with good or excellent, coming in at 54%. So a marked difference there. And again, those with poor customer satisfaction are 20. So the difference between the two is 25%, and that's really quite the stark difference between the top performers and the bottom performers. Nearly twice as many people who act on real-time KPIs have good or excellent customer satisfaction. So first of all, it's having those real-time KPIs, and second of all, it's acting on them. And customers like to provide feedback immediately, it's more accurate, and it's a better reflection of the service that you're providing. But of course, they also like it if you follow up on the feedback that they give you immediately. So your chances are you're going to have better customer satisfaction if you follow that process. And what difference can a process owner have on a customer satisfaction? I thought this particular area was very interesting. A process owner as a job title didn't really exist about 4 or 5 years ago. It's something that's very widely used now. And the importance here is having a process owner that has teeth and actually owns the process. They own all the changes within the process. They have reporting lines. So the people that are involved in the process, for example, maybe in accounts payable or within purchase to pay, have a reporting line into the process owner. The process owner signs off on any applications or technology that touches their process. They are really very authoritative figures within the organization. And what we're seeing is that 27% of those providing good levels of customer satisfaction have a process owner in charge of customer satisfaction. So I thought that was a stark difference between the high performers, the top performers, and the bottom performers. And that's either full-time, overall in charge, or a shared responsibility. And you can see here that those with poor customer satisfaction, they had some of their process owners having a shared responsibility over customer satisfaction. And of those with poor customer satisfaction, only 3% have process owners in charge of customer satisfaction. So first of all, if you don't have a process owner, think about introducing one and make sure it's not just a nominal change. And second of all, see if it makes sense to you, and it clearly does make sense to a lot of companies, to have customer satisfaction under the responsibility of the process owner. So to summarize some of the takeaways from the survey, it's obvious that improving customer service is a priority, but unfortunately only 3% rated their service as excellent. And also bear in mind that this was a shared services organisation rating it, not the customer. So had we asked the customer, the figure might have been lower. 43% rated improving customer satisfaction as their highest priority, and 80% ranked it in their top 3 priorities. So very encouraging, and again, coming back to some points that Nigel and I have made earlier, this might be pertaining to the fact that we were asking, although about 60% of the respondents had a shared services centre that was younger than 5 years, so it could be a symptom of the age of the shared services organisations that we were surveying. And 45% are growing their shared services model. So this is really important because shared services organisations are growing, and in order to grow you have to have happy customers, because you need a good reputation in order to grow. You need the client behind you and the business behind you. So customer satisfaction really is key, and I think my point here is that with that growth comes ever increasing opportunities for cost savings and economies of scale. Moving on to the second takeaway, process standardization and process change is a major hurdle. And in order to get customer satisfaction spot on, these two areas really, really do need to be addressed. If you've got process variation, multiple processes, poor compliancy within your organization, then customer satisfaction is going to be something that is maybe an ideal and a dream and is not something that's actually a reality today. So getting the process standardization nailed is really fundamental to getting your customer satisfied and then seeing that growth and making your shared services offering very scalable. The top two elements most likely to undermine your satisfaction were absolutely around process variation and standardization. Encouragingly, 86% ranked further standardization of processes as one of their top three priorities. Moving on, process owners absolutely make a difference. 27% of those providing good levels of customer satisfaction have a process owner in charge of customer satisfaction. And I thought this was a startling takeaway. I hadn't imagined before we did this survey that this would be the case, and it's really interesting that it is. So not only do you have the process owner in charge of the process, but also the customer experience, and I think this is such an encouraging development for shared services. 71% with good levels of customer satisfaction have a process owner in charge or with a shared responsibility. I think the statistics there say it all, and only 3% of those with poor customer satisfaction had a process owner in charge of customer satisfaction. And the final takeaway, good customer service can absolutely take your organization to the next level. Unsurprisingly, those with poor customer satisfaction levels were focusing on improving it, so you should think, so that they could grow. And those providing good customer services are 4 times more likely to be focusing on continuous improvement, and that really is where shared services moves into a very exciting realm. So with that, I'd now like to hand back to Nigel, please.
Thank you, Susan, and again, thank you for putting a great summary to all of that. And I think what we're looking at now is the Nimbus 6-step program that I hope will help. And again, there's a lot more to this, so please, I encourage you to call us directly if you wish to go through it. I think one of the things that we're going to do is look at this first step, and we call this thinking differently. And if you look at this box that is in front of you, you'll see that we describe this box. And apologies for those who know me and have seen me draw this 1,000 times, but this is quite key in the difference in how you need to think about it, what it is that you capture when it comes to process. And the foundation of all customer service has to be the process. The process dictates everything. And it also dictates what you measure. But if we look at this box, and this is what we represent and what people do in their daily lives. And you can see there's this white line down below that denotes that everything below this white line is this structured data. It's the 20% of this automation. And above the line is unstructured data. This is the manual activities that actual people do. But actually people, when you think about it, when people are performing how to raise an invoice or raise a purchase order, only now and again do they touch SAP or Oracle, whatever system they seem to be touching. So they go through this end-to-end process. It's highly manual. And yet when we look at it, 100% of the investment has been spent typically on below the line. 100% of process investment on below the line. And yet the risk and the lack of customer satisfaction normally comes, the happiness factor, normally comes above the line. So 100% of the risk that you have around trying to drive customer satisfaction is actually not being captured in your organization. So how are we going to solve this problem? So step 2 is we have to engage differently. And engaging differently is something we have to stop. And so when we look at what we see every single day, a lot of this goes on. And when I talk to customers and say, is this how process looks to you? Is this the kind of workshop that you have? And a lot of nodding heads. Again, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, because when you have lean teams and everything else like that, you have people engaged in the room. The problem is what happens when they leave the room. So this second phase of how you translate what you see here and what is given typically looks like this. It's a complex process diagram that has lots of variations in it. It is complicated. People can't really follow it. And then we're going to go into the third phase, of which how the blueprint would look. And the blueprint will actually look like a very thick document. And how often have we seen consulting firms regurgitating this blueprint phase if it's an SAP consolidation? But typically this is what goes on. And you spend an awful lot of money for this. But you can't do much with it when you're thinking about how you're laying your foundation for customer service. And then we go into the fourth phase. And this is how you begin to process, deploy all of your process content through your intranets. And typically the kind of responses you're going to get from your customers is this. This is the type of frustration that employees, even us as employees inside our centers, feel because we can't find the information. We can't, and when we do find it, is it in context? Is it right? Is it relevant? And is it really for me? And can I actually do something with it? And of course, we all want to go to the fifth and final phase, which is something around continuous improvement. And typically, this is what we're left with. We're left with going back to that very first slide where we looked at people looking at customer satisfaction as important and yet talent as low. And I think this is the kind of the delta that we're seeing. So what we need to move towards is a different way. What you need to try and have is a real-time process capturing, and this is again from Nimbus, but a real-time simple way to engage process capture with stakeholders that at the same time is extremely well governed, that lays a foundation of your process architecture. And then what we call this is actually interacting and process capture at the speed of conversation. And when you're doing that, there's no better way to get buy-in and adoption than putting the subject matter experts right at the heart of the project. So step three. And step three is about communicating, and communicating differently. You need to capture the process in a way that people understand. And you'll see here a Nimbus process design as complex as it will get. You'll not see any kind of multiple symbols or shapes or things like that, because what you have to do is capture process for, well, we all capture process for a reason. And we all capture process to give to people to follow. That's the simplicity of it all. And yet we make it all very complicated typically. So we have a very simple process design, which is a box. You have an input. You'll see in the top left-hand corner this box 1, create and authorize a requisition. And you'll see some very fundamental, simple characteristics. We have an input. You know, what is the trigger for this event? We have a verb in now describing what is going on. And we can see who does it and what is the outcome of this event. And right below you can see that we can begin to attach right information. And again, the whole nature, down below you see a picture of, even myself. I'm a stakeholder, so some richness around it. And then going on to the next step, we need to think about step 4 is how we govern. And this is really quite something that was interesting to me, going back to the previous slide, where we had 2% only felt that governance was important. But to me, unless you have a foundation of process, if you don't have governance, you have nothing. So when we're looking at this, you can see that actually you can put all of the relevant information in context to the right person. So when you deliver up the process content to all of your staff or a self-service, you can guarantee that what you deliver is right, relevant, and in context. So we're going on to step 5, which is deploying. And we all know, going back to the first slide of step 1, that very often we see a lot of employees frustrated by the fact they can't find information. They can't have information in a role-based way. So what they end up doing is asking the person to sit next to them, hey, do you know how to go and raise an invoice? No, because I can't find how to do it. Well, this person tells me the story, and you're banking on that person knowing. That person may only know what the process was 5 years ago, and it's different today. So you have to deploy process in a way how employees want. And I call it giving them the Monday morning, or taking away the Monday morning experience. And that Monday morning experience is at the weekend and at night, they're engaging with applications that are rich, like Facebook, and they're buying from Amazon and eBay. And yet when they come to work, they have going back to Outlook and Word and Excel. And that's the horrible thing about it. You have to give them a platform that's rich, and it also allows them to have these how-to guides, these step-by-step guides that just deliver up what you need to do as the next step. So when you have all of these desktop procedures based on paper, you can eradicate that and you can bring in social media into these how-to guides. Also, the ability to have real-time surveys connected to process content. So when we looked at people looking at how do I interact, how often do I interact with my customers, is quarterly, annually with 56%. Well, why not do it at the point of interaction? But not even just give them the survey, get the data back in real time. So you begin to do something about it. So your ability to add a lot of new application that interacts and enriches the customer experience is quite a simple thing to do. And when you have that, then you have a foundation for continuous improvement. But what you really have is the foundation for the last step, which is about how you reinforce. And you've got to reinforce differently. And this is about going back to the whole measurements. And what do you measure? So what you need to have, connected to process is real-time data coming from the process, delivering up information that is in context of the people who need to see it, but in real time. Whether you're measuring real-time statistics around service item cost, the cost of your transactions, whether you're looking at managing your individual productivity, again, this is all connected to process, and this is a part of Nimbus. This is something that's very, very new. It's called Nimbus Analytics, and the way that we can help you really measure not just customer satisfaction, but a whole bunch of things. Measure your SLA, and out of all of that output, get recommendation and findings of how you can actually achieve process improvement. But everything is connected to process. And when you have it connected to process, then you have a platform for change and continuous improvement. So finally, in summary, to me, this is my personal mantra, really, but customer satisfaction needs these things. We have to be able to capture both what is manual, that whole end-to-end view, that whole architecture and hierarchy of process content, where we connect all of the automated system components, the SAP transactions, into those activities. But it's not SAP, it's not ERP that is the process. It is something very different. We need to be able to convince people that you change the end-to-end process, you don't change SAP. The process is the law. The process is the governor, if you like, of what we do. And then you have information that should be a single version of the truth. That is delivered for people, not the need to be found. And I completely agree, and I was so excited to see in the data before, the impact of having process owners. They're not just accountable for what they do, what they own as a procurement to pay process owner or an AP process owner, but they become accountable for the change and ongoing governance and deployment and adoption and uptake and the interaction of customer service. That's what process owners need to do. It's very encouraging to see it. Customer satisfaction is not a transaction. It is an interaction. And as soon as we begin to be able to lay a foundation of application that enables that, the quicker that we'll be able to measure happiness and encouragement. And I think as a nirvana, if we are able to measure interaction every single day, then continuous improvement will become everybody's responsibility. And when it becomes everyone's responsibility, then you have a foundation of actual sustaining excellence. And in the last anecdote I'd like to say before handing back to Susie, even our own shared services, our support center inside Nimbus, and we are a process company, we can't help it, it's in our DNA. But we measure customer satisfaction at every single point. And we actually rate it 98.6% excellent or good. So I'm wondering if that is a kind of correlation to how the impact of process can have an impact on your customer satisfaction. So thank you very much. And back to Susie.
Thank you, Nigel. And thank you very much, Nigel. And just before we move to questions, just a final content poll coming up on your screen. So I'm sure that we have a few people that responded to the survey on the webinar today, but if you did or if you didn't, where would you rank talent and making sure that the talent that you have in your shared services will absolutely take you to the place where you want to be as far as the shared services vision for the next 2, 3, 4 years is concerned, customer satisfaction is concerned? Where would you rank talent? Bearing in mind you've got other key priorities and goals, where would it be as far as ranking it 1 to 7, 1 being the highest and 7 the lowest. Please do vote on this one. We're only at 38% of respondents, so if you haven't already voted, please do. It's going to be quite a telling bit of data for us. So closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the data coming up on your screen now. Well, really encouragingly, only 3% of you said it would actually be around the 7 mark. And we do have a bell curve here. You can see 47% of you coming in at ranking it 3 to 4, and 13% of you have said it's coming in as your top priority. So thank you very much for that. Now let's move to questions. So I know that you, I think it's more of a definition, but we've got a question here from a viewer. OLA, Nigel, can you just differentiate between an SLA and an OLA and give an example, please?
Well, I think it's quite simple. I think the SLA is that automated measurement. It's the transactions that you have with your customers. How well are you supplying your system interaction, your transactions? How quickly have they been done? How low of a cost have they been done? The OLA is the operating level agreement. They're much more. Yes, it's softer in its approach, but how well can you interact with your customers? What kind of other measurements versus the transaction can you offer up? About the onboarding of new staff, the how well that you are being measured with it's my happiness scale. The two are very fundamentally different. I think the SLA is transactional, and the OLA is clearly about the customer interaction, the satisfaction piece. Because we have to separate the two, because the transaction is not, if you think about transaction, is not happiness. Interaction is the happiness, and that's the difference between the two.
A viewer who I'm guessing is setting up a shared services organization in Asia and or Latin America, her question is, well, what are you seeing as far as shared services organizations setting up in Asia, Latin America, and the Nimbus experience, and for what kind of processes, and are you seeing a different view of centralizing those processes?
It's a very good question, and for me, this is the personal thing for us in terms of looking at the Asian market. For us, it's a brand new opportunity. We're only beginning now as a business to actually put our own headcount into that location, but we are seeing a huge uptake in all levels of process. And I'd say that dominantly it's about finance, but we are seeing an uptake in HR as well. But I think the exciting thing for me was this whole push and drive to make sure that customer satisfaction and the measurements of that are at the forefront of what they do today. It's not something they want to wait for. It's something they clearly have to get a handle on today. And I think that was the most encouraging thing for us, and hence why we're spending a lot of time in Asia and down in Australia and New Zealand too, because that seems to be a very accepting market for what Nimbus can provide.
Another question, to what degree are you experiencing with your clients, Nigel, that it's the process owner who is responsible for customer satisfaction?
Oh, a lot. And again, I think it's something Susie, you said about 20 minutes ago rather. This is something that's quite new, and I think the strength and authority that process owners have today is very different to what it was even 12 months ago, because the addition to what that process owner owns, because you can own the transactions of your process, but then all of a sudden you own the change and deployment and adoption of how well that process sticks in the organization. It's a very powerful thing to be in charge of. And I think, again, most of our customers are looking for new ways where the process becomes more powerful, and the process is more powerful when you begin to layer these other components on top of it, whether they be business controls and risk and all that kind of stuff. But again, it's how it gets deployed and how well is it used. Because if it's used, it's effective. And if it's engaged well, it becomes a value. So the process owners owning that, we're seeing it more and more. And it's a very encouraging thing.
keep your questions coming, please, ladies and gentlemen. As far as going back to locations in Asia, where are you seeing that your clients are actually located?
Well, obviously, you know, we have Nimbus has an operation in India, in Bangalore, so a mixture of India. We're seeing some growth in Indonesia, Singapore, which was a strong market, and see that coming back. So that right now, again, that's only my data, which is again a new journey for us. But those are the three core areas we're seeing growth.
I think just to add on to that, for the lady that asked the question, Manila is very popular with shared services organisations, offshore shared services organisations. It's been popular for 5, 7 or so years. Also, obviously, with North and South India, I was having a conversation with a lady the other day who was actually talking to me about talent engineering and how much do you do talent engineering within your shared services. And what she meant by that is where are you actually locating your shared services based on the talent that's available, and that Northern India provides different talent to Southern India. So that's quite a useful kind of tip as well. So I've got a question here from a viewer. We have shared services, processes and software across 11, soon to be 12 sites in Europe, and we sometimes struggle to deal with requests for change to a process and also the supporting software from, in particular, one of the sites. They always think that they should be unique and treated differently. I'm sure you've heard this story before, Nigel, and that we should be tailoring the process and the software to them specifically. What advice can you give this viewer to approach that?
Okay. Well, again, this is a very common thing that we see all the time, and it's every country having those special requirements, and therefore they need individual attention. But it comes back to, to me, if it's not legal, it's not tax, it's not regulatory, then there shouldn't be any difference. You shouldn't have that speciality, because those are the key things that affect the business. So again, but it doesn't mean you don't offer up variations of the process, but it must be formed and aligned to your global standard. So first of all, create what the process is end to end, and then look at each territory, each region, or even each department, and look for those 3 key reasons for change. If they're acceptable, make those changes, but add them on to your global process. So when you have, when you deploy, they will feel very special. Because when they deploy, if I'm a shared service operator working in Italy, all I'm going to see is my Italian version of the process. But you have the governance and assurance right below that you're not duplicating process content to manage that, because it's all connected to your global process at the end of the day. So you can make people very special. I would be quite firm in making sure you have the rigor that denotes what is allowed to be a special change or not, and then cater for that by deploying it back up to them in a very simple way in a language that, either a language and obviously some of those regulatory changes or legal changes that may require some change.
We've got 2 more questions and we've only got 2 more minutes. So you have demoed a rich process modeling tool that looks quite powerful. Do you offer a modeling tool for other components of the Shared Services Center architecture, i.e. applications, systems, technologies, functions, organizations, roles, data, etc.?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I was having this debate actually last week. The great thing around Nimbus is, and this is a paradigm shift I want people to start to understand, there is a difference between what you model and what you map. When people talk in process modeling terms, that is very system architecture based, very automated steps. When you map your end-to-end process, you need to be able to bring in those models of automation into your whole business process map. So yes, the answer is yes, we do a lot. I mean, for me, when we first started our business 14 years ago, we were around quality management. We got involved in Lean Six Sigma. We got involved in supply chain. We got involved in a whole host of things. It's only now that I really focused it down to one core market. But yes, you can map anything you like within Nimbus. But again, what it gives you is the simplicity of the approach. that brings your automation layer and your manual layers together in one unified end-to-end process architecture, where you begin to add on your business controls, your risks, all of your documentation, all of your learning videos, all of your training, everything, linking in your SAP transactions, your Oracle transactions. It doesn't really matter, but you have a foundation to build on. So yes, we do a lot. So for that person who asked that question, please send me an email afterwards, and maybe we can take it a bit further offline to investigate more what it is that you are trying to accomplish.
Okay, and just before I go into my final question, I just want to ask you, you can see on your screen that we've got the Summit for Leaders in Financial Services. We have a lot of debate, like the debate that we've had in the last 60 minutes. It's going to be a very powerful couple of days. We've got Nigel coming to join us, and TIBCO Nimbus is our platinum sponsor there. My question to you, TIBCO Nimbus have acquired 2 tickets to be given to 2 lucky winners today. If you would like to be entered into that raffle to win these tickets, they're $3,000, so they're worth doing. If you win it and you're in the UK and can't get to Chicago, but you've got colleagues in the States, you can transfer it to them. So please do respond to that. And then whilst that's open, I'm going to be closing it shortly. I'll just go to the final question. Similar to the last question, but a little different. How do you promote standardization in a working environment where management is reluctant to change? Do we need a 7th step? And that's to you, Nigel.
I was thinking. I don't think we need a 7th step, because I think if the reason, once you have all the other 6 steps in place, there should be no resistance.
I think that's quite a good note to end on. So thank you to Nigel for all of his energy and his input there. Thank you very much to you for your time and attention, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Goodbye.